They erased it from the maps. They burned its libraries. They renamed its rivers and buried its monuments under centuries of silence. What you are about to hear is not legend. It is not myth. It is documented history. The story of an empire so vast, so wealthy, so militarily dominant that the outside world struggled to describe it without reaching for the language of gods. This is the Mali Empire, and they never taught you about it. In the next 25 minutes, the version of world history you were handed in school will not survive intact. If this is the first time this channel has crossed your path, stay, subscribe, because what gets covered here is what the textbooks left on the floor. Now, back to West Africa, 14th century, and a kingdom that controlled more gold than any government on earth. By the early 13th century, the Mali Empire stretched across approximately 1.29 million square kilometers of West Africa. To put that in perspective, it was larger than Western Europe. It governed an estimated 40 to 50 million people at a time when London held barely 80,000. This was not a tribal encampment. This was a superstate. The empire's origins trace back to the Mandinka people of the Mande ethnic group. Its foundational story begins in the early 12th century with a warrior king named Sundiata Keita. In 1235, at the Battle of Kurina, Sundiata defeated Sumanguru Kante of the Soso Kingdom, a military victory that is not merely legend, but is corroborated by multiple independent oral traditions, Arabic manuscripts, and archaeological evidence from the region. From that single battle, Sundiata constructed the political architecture of an empire that would endure for over 2 centuries. The Mali Empire sat at the crossroads of the most profitable trade routes in the medieval world. To the north, the Saharan caravan routes connecting sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean. To the south and west, the Niger River, a superhighway of commerce stretching thousands of kilometers. The empire controlled 2 resources that the entire medieval world desperately needed: gold and salt. The Bambouk and Bouré goldfields, both within Mali's borders, produced somewhere between half and 2/3 of the world's gold supply during the empire's peak. Salt, essential for food preservation and traded weight for weight in gold in some regions, came from the mines at Tagaza in the north, also under Malian control or influence. Whoever controlled these routes controlled the medieval world's economy. Mali controlled both. The cities of the Mali Empire were not rough frontier settlements. Timbuktu, Jean, Niani, and Gao were centers of scholarship, commerce, and architecture. Timbuktu alone housed 3 major universities, the Sankore Mosque University being the most famous, where scholars from across the Islamic world came to study astronomy, mathematics, medicine, law, and history. At its height, the city's population reached 100,000. The libraries held between 400,000 and 700,000 manuscripts. Many survive to this day. The empire did not grow by accident. It grew by military precision and political intelligence. The Malian army at its peak consisted of a professional cavalry force, elite infantry units, and a river fleet that patrolled the Niger. The cavalry alone, numbering in the tens of thousands, gave Mali a power projection capability that no rival in the region could match. When the empire expanded, it typically offered vassal states a choice: submission with autonomy or conquest without mercy. But brute force was only part of the equation. The Malian system of governance was sophisticated. The empire was divided into provinces, each administered by a farba, a governor appointed by the emperor called the Mansa. Local rulers could maintain their positions and customs as long as they paid tribute and remained loyal. It was a system not unlike those used by the Roman Empire or the Mongol Khanate, pragmatic, scalable, and remarkably stable for over 2 centuries. In 1352, the Arab scholar and explorer Ibn Battuta visited the Mali Empire and recorded his observations in extraordinary detail. He described a society of deep order, justice, and safety. He noted that travelers could move across vast distances without fear of theft or assault, a remark he made pointedly, given that he had traveled much of the known world and could make comparisons. He described the Mansa's court as one of profound ceremonial dignity. He noted the empire's mosques, its markets, and the strict legal code enforced throughout the land. But no account of the Mali Empire is complete without the story of its most famous ruler, Mansa Musa, who reigned from approximately 1312 to 1337. He is, by most modern economic estimates, the wealthiest individual in recorded human history, wealthier than any modern billionaire when wealth is measured as a share of contemporary global GDP. In 1324, Mansa Musa made his pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj. He departed from Nyani with a caravan estimated by contemporary sources at 60,000 people, including 12,000 personal servants and 80 to 100 camel loads of gold dust, each camel carrying approximately 136 kilograms. When the caravan passed through Cairo, Mansa Musa spent and distributed so much gold that he triggered a decade-long inflation crisis in Egypt, the Hijaz, and parts of the Mediterranean world. The gold markets of Cairo did not recover for 12 years. A single king's pilgrimage had destabilized the global economy. Every great empire plants the seeds of its own destruction. For the Mali Empire, those seeds were sown in the decades after Mansa Musa's death. The succession was not clean. The Mansa system, powerful when occupied by a capable ruler, became a liability when weak or contested rulers sat the throne. Between 1337 and the empire's final collapse, at least a dozen different Mansas held power. Several were deposed, some were killed. The palace was no longer a seat of strength, it had become a battlefield in itself. As central authority weakened, the empire's vassal states began testing their chains. The Songhai people of the eastern Niger Bend, long under Malian dominance, began asserting independence. The Tuareg Berbers of the north, who historically served as desert intermediaries, began raiding Malian trade routes. The Mossi kingdoms to the southeast launched repeated incursions that Malian forces, stretched thin and poorly led, struggled to repel. Environmental pressure compounded political dysfunction. Climate records and paleoclimatological studies of the West African Sahel indicated that the 14th and 15th centuries brought increasing drought and desertification to the region. Agricultural yields declined. The Niger River's flood cycles, which had sustained crop production in the empire's heartland, became less predictable. Food insecurity created instability. Instability made it harder to collect tribute. Without tribute, the army couldn't be paid. Without the army, the borders couldn't be held. The religious landscape also shifted. Islam, which had been embraced by the Mali ruling class since the 11th century and which provided the empire with a shared administrative and diplomatic language across the Muslim world, began fragmenting into competing schools of interpretation. Local syncretism, the blending of Islamic practice with indigenous West African spiritual traditions, created tension between reformist clerics and traditional power structures. The cohesion that had once unified the empire across ethnic and linguistic lines began to fray. The killing blow did not come from outside Africa, it came from within. The Songhai Empire, which had been a subordinate vassal state under Malian authority, had been rebuilding its power base for decades under a series of capable rulers. In 1464, Sunni Ali Bair came to the Songhai throne. He was a military commander of exceptional ability. Within 2 decades, he had conquered Timbuktu, seized Guinea, and stripped the Mali Empire of its most economically vital territories. The fall of Timbuktu to Songhai forces in 1468 was not a simple military transfer of power. Contemporary accounts describe a period of brutal violence against the city's scholarly class, the very people who had made Timbuktu the intellectual capital of the medieval world. Ibn Khaldun and later chroniclers from the Timbuktu manuscript tradition record that scholars were expelled, imprisoned, or killed. Some manuscripts were hidden, others were destroyed. The infrastructure of learning that had taken 200 years to build was gutted in a matter of years. The Mali Empire did not collapse overnight. It contracted. Provinces peeled away. The remaining Mansas ruled over an ever-shrinking territory, their authority increasingly ceremonial. By the mid-15th century, the empire that had once controlled the economic destiny of 3 continents had retreated to its original heartland around the Upper Niger. By the late 16th century, even that remnant had dissolved. Then came a force from a different direction entirely. In 1591, the Saadian dynasty of Morocco, armed with firearms acquired through trade with European powers, sent an invasion force of approximately 4,000 soldiers, including a significant number of Spanish Moorish soldiers and Portuguese renegades, across the Sahara Desert. This force, under the command of Judar Pasha, destroyed the Songhai army at the Battle of Tondibi. The Songhai Empire collapsed, and with it, the last institutional memory of the Mali Empire's legacy in the region was fractured beyond recovery. The Mali Empire did not disappear because evidence was lacking. It disappeared from Western consciousness, because its existence was inconvenient. The transatlantic slave trade, which would begin in earnest in the 15th and 16th centuries, required a philosophical justification. That justification was built on a myth that Africa had no history worth recording, no civilizations worth acknowledging, no intellectual tradition worth preserving. This myth was not accidental. It was manufactured. European scholars in the 18th and 19th centuries, operating within the intellectual framework of colonialism, systematically attributed the architectural and scholarly achievements of West Africa to outside influences. Timbuktu's universities were described as derivative of Arabic scholarship, not indigenous genius. Mali's governance structures were framed as primitive compared to European feudalism, despite being demonstrably more stable and more just by contemporary accounts. The Catalan Atlas, which had celebrated Mansa Musa in 1375, was treated as a curiosity rather than a primary historical source. Scholars who pushed back faced institutional resistance. The Senegalese historian and anthropologist Cheikh Anta Diop spent his career arguing, with archaeological and linguistic evidence, for the indigenous sophistication of African civilizations. His work was dismissed, debated, and delayed for decades before gaining the scholarly recognition it deserved. The British historian Nehemiah Levzion's definitive work on the Mali Empire, published in 1973, remains one of the most thorough academic treatments of the subject, yet its findings have never entered mainstream school curricula in Europe or North America. The erasure was also logistical. The Moroccan invasion of 1591 had physically removed hundreds of Timbuktu's scholars to Marrakesh. Manuscripts were dispersed, hidden, or lost. The oral traditions that carried Malian history were dismissed by Western academics as unreliable, despite being the primary historical record of dozens of pre-literate European societies as well. The double standard was not subtle, it was policy. The Mali Empire is gone, but it never truly left. The Mandinka people exist today across West Africa, in Mali, Senegal, Guinea, Gambia, and the diaspora. The manuscripts of Timbuktu, despite centuries of neglect and active destruction, number in the hundreds of thousands, many still being cataloged, translated, and digitized by the Ahmed Baba Institute and partner organizations. The Great Mosque of Djenné, a direct descendant of the Mali Empire's architectural tradition, is still standing. It is the largest mud brick structure in the world. Archaeologists working at the site of Niani, the probable capital of the Mali Empire, continue to uncover evidence of a city of significant scale and architectural sophistication. Each excavation season adds depth to the picture that the history books refuse to paint. The silence is being broken, not by revision, by evidence. They tried to erase a civilization from the record of human achievement. They burned the libraries, scattered the scholars, renamed the rivers, and rewrote the maps. But the gold is still in the ground. The manuscripts are still on the shelves. The stones of Niani are still in the earth. And the story, this story, is still being told.